In 1962, a fire started in a coal seam under a small town in Pennsylvania. It is still burning today. On cold mornings, smoke comes up through cracks in the ground. The stretch of highway that ran through the town buckled, split apart, and was eventually closed and buried. The seam has enough coal to burn for another 250 years. Nobody alive will see it go out. The town above it no longer has a zip code. The post office took it away. That town is number 1. We will get there. But it is not the one that emptied in a single afternoon. It is not the valley cleared for a dam that was never built. And it is not the one that was legally erased from the map of the United States. 10 American towns, empty streets in the snow, houses underwater, gray mountains of mine waste standing over abandoned schools. Every one of them was emptied on purpose, or emptied so completely that going back was never an option. We are starting in Alaska. Number 10. Kennecott, Alaska. Kennecott sits in the Wrangell Mountains, surrounded by glaciers and spruce forest, at the end of a railroad that no longer exists. The buildings are red. The largest is 14 stories tall, built into the side of a mountain, and it was a copper mill. For nearly 30 years, this was one of the richest copper operations on Earth. Then, the high-grade ore ran out. On November 10, 1938, the last train left. Workers were given a few hours' notice. They packed what they could carry and walked to the platform. Everything else stayed exactly where it was. Dishes on tables, tools on benches, medical records in the hospital. Think about that for a second. A town of hundreds of people functioning normally at breakfast and gone by dark. The rails were pulled up behind them. There was no road. For decades, the only way in was on foot or by small plane. And the red buildings simply stood there in the snow, emptying themselves out one winter at a time. Number 9. Vanport, Oregon. Vanport was built in a hurry during the Second World War to house shipyard workers. Within 2 years, it held over 40,000 people. It was the second largest city in Oregon and the largest public housing project in the country. It was also built on a floodplain, behind earthen dikes, below the level of the Columbia River. On the morning of Memorial Day 1948, residents were handed a notice from the Housing Authority. It told them the dikes were safe at present. It told them they would be warned if necessary, and that they would have time to leave. The last line said, "Do not get excited." At 4:05 that afternoon, a railroad embankment gave way. The hole started at 6 feet. Within minutes, it was a 500-foot gap, and the Columbia River was coming through it. Vanport was underwater by nightfall. 15 people did not get out. The city was never rebuilt, not repaired, not relocated, not memorialized with anything more than a small marker, erased. Today, the site is a golf course, a wetland, a stretch of racetrack, and a slough where the neighborhoods used to be. There are no streets left. No foundations, no street signs, just grass. Around 18,000 people were living there that morning. Most of them had nowhere to go by the next one. Number 8, Cheshire, Ohio. Cheshire was a village on the Ohio River, about 200 people, sitting in the shadow of a very large coal-fired power plant. In 2001, the plant installed new equipment to reduce one pollutant. It had a side effect. It began producing a blue sulfuric acid mist that drifted into the village, stung eyes, blistered skin, and settled on cars and gardens. The power company had a choice: fix the plant or remove the village. In 2002, it offered to buy the entire town. $20 million, split among the residents, roughly 3 times what the properties were worth. There was one condition attached to the check. Anyone who took the money gave up the right to sue over health effects permanently. Almost everyone took it. The houses were bulldozed and the streets were left standing with nothing on either side of them, in the shadow of 2 smokestacks 800 feet tall. The village still technically exists on paper, with a handful of holdouts, but the town is gone. That is the part worth sitting with. Cheshire was not condemned by a court or evacuated by an agency. It was purchased. Quick note: if this is holding your attention, The most useful thing you can do is just keep watching. That is it. Back to the list. Number 7. The Ashokan Valley, New York. This one was not an accident. It was planned for years in an office with lawyers. By 1900, New York City was running out of water. The solution was to go 100 miles north into the Catskill Mountains, dam the Esopus Creek, and let the valley fill. There were towns in that valley: Ashokan, Broadhead's Bridge, Glenford, West Hurley, Brown's Station, and several more. Around 2,000 people lived in them. There were mills, churches, schools, and roughly 30 cemeteries. The state took the land. Buildings were burned or dismantled. Trees were cut to the stumps so the water would stay clean. And the graves were dug up, more than 2,000 of them, and moved to higher ground. Then they closed the valve. Here is the detail that tells you what kind of project this was. New York City's water still comes down out of those mountains today, and the main flow needs no pumps at all. It leaves the reservoir at a certain elevation and simply falls toward the city. From Ashokan, it runs 92 miles through the Catskill Aqueduct, under farms and under towns. And when it reaches the Hudson River, it does not cross it. It goes under it, more than 1,000 feet below the riverbed. The newest tunnel in that same system runs 85 miles and is the longest continuous tunnel in the world. 9 million people drink from all of this every day. Almost none of them know it is standing on top of somewhere. Number 6. The Minisink Valley, New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Ashokan at least produced something. This one did not. In the mid-1950s, 2 tropical storms flooded the Delaware River Valley. The Army Corps of Engineers proposed a solution: a dam near a place called Tox Island, which would have been one of the largest in the country, backing up a lake almost 40 miles long. The land had to be cleared first. Beginning in the 1960s, the federal government bought or condemned around 72,000 acres along both sides of the river. Farms went, villages went, churches, summer camps, general stores, family land that had been in the same hands for 200 years. Park records describe more than 3,000 homes razed. Estimates of how many people were moved out run from 8,000 to 15,000, depending on who is counting. Many of them were paid a fraction of what they thought their property was worth. If they refused, it was condemned anyway. Then the dam was canceled. Opposition grew. The early environmental movement made it a national fight, and engineers found something inconvenient. The proposed dam site sat near a fault line. The project was disapproved in 1975 and deauthorized the following year. The valley is now the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area, and about 5 million people a year visit it. Scattered through the woods are farmhouses and barns with the roofs falling in. Nobody lives in them. Nobody ever will. 15,000 people, give or take, were moved out of a valley to make room for a lake that does not exist. Number 5. Gilman, Colorado. Gilman is nearly 9,000 feet up in the mountains, 40 minutes from Vail, clinging to the edge of a gorge. It was a company town built for a zinc and lead mine, and at its peak several hundred people lived there. The mine went deep, and the deeper it went, the more water it hit. That water came out carrying heavy metals and went straight into the Eagle River. In 1984, the mine shut for good. The pumps were switched off, and the tunnels were left to flood. The Environmental Protection Agency moved in the same year. Contaminated groundwater, unsafe levels of lead and cadmium, no realistic way to fix it while people were living there. The last families were evicted the following spring by the company that owned the town. The post office closed behind them. 8 million tons of mine waste were left on that mountain, and the corporation eventually held responsible for cleaning it up was the parent company of the television network CBS. What is left is one of the most complete ghost towns in the American West. School desks, a bowling alley, hospital beds, all of it visible from a highway that thousands of skiers drive past every winter without knowing what they are looking at. It is private property, and it is patrolled, and people are arrested there every year for trying to get in. Number 4. Treece, Kansas and Picher, Oklahoma. These are two towns, and they are really one story. They sit against each other on the state line, and what killed them is the same thing. For a century, this corner of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri produced the lead and zinc that supplied American industry. What the mines left behind is called chat, crushed gray rock, laced with lead, piled into artificial mountains up to 200 feet high. And here is the part that is hard to hear. For decades, nobody treated it as waste. Chat was used as gravel. It was spread on driveways and on roads. It was used in school playgrounds and in sandboxes because it was free and it drained well. Children played on those piles. Communities were built around them. Studies in the 1990s found that around a third of the children tested in the area had elevated lead levels in their blood. Then, federal engineers surveyed the ground and found something worse. A large share of both towns sat over mine tunnels at risk of collapse. Houses were already falling into holes. Picher was the bigger of the two, 20,000 people at its peak. The buyout there began in 2006. Then, on the 10th of May, 2008, a large tornado tore through what was left of it, destroying more than 100 homes and killing 6 people in Picher alone. The holdouts gave up. Picher stopped operating as a town in 2009. Its charter was formally dissolved 4 years later. Treece went the same way. Congress approved a federal buyout in 2010. Every resident was paid to leave, and the last ones went in 2012. The last man in Picher was a pharmacist named Gary Linderman. He kept his shop open for the handful of people still living among the chat piles and the boarded windows. He stayed until he died in 2015. 2 towns dissolved. The piles are still there. Number 3. Love Canal, New York. In the 1940s and 1950s, a chemical company buried around 21,000 tons of industrial waste in an unfinished canal in Niagara Falls. Then it covered it with clay, sold the land to the local school board for $1, and included a note in the deed describing what was underneath. An elementary school was built on top of it. Then houses, around 800 of them, ringing the canal, plus a block of low-income apartments. By the 1970s, the chemicals were surfacing. Black sludge in basements, substances coming up through the soil of backyards. Residents documented miscarriages and birth defects and could not get anyone to listen for years. In August of 1978, the President of the United States declared a federal emergency at a residential neighborhood. That had never happened before for anything other than a natural disaster. But that first declaration only moved the families in the 2 rings of houses closest to the canal, a few hundred people. Everyone else was told they were not at sufficient risk, and they stayed. It took 2 more years and a second presidential emergency before the rest of them got out. In the end, more than 800 families were relocated. The homes nearest the canal were demolished, and the site was capped and fenced. Love Canal is the reason the Superfund program exists. An entire national law was written because of one street. Number 2. Times Beach, Missouri. Times Beach was an ordinary river town of about 2,000 people west of St. Louis. In the 1970s, it had a dust problem on its unpaved roads, so it hired a contractor to spray them with waste oil. The contractor was mixing that oil with chemical waste. The waste contained dioxin. He sprayed the roads of Times Beach roughly 24 times over 4 years. Nobody knew until 1982, when investigators traced the contamination. Testing found dioxin levels hundreds of times above what was considered safe. Then, the river flooded and spread it across the whole town. The federal government bought every property, $33 million. Everyone left, and then it did something it has done almost nowhere else. In 1985, Times Beach was disincorporated. It was not just evacuated. It was removed from existence as a legal place, struck from the state of Missouri. Every building was demolished. The soil was dug up and burned in an incinerator built on the site itself. Today, it is a state park on Old Route 66 with a visitor center, a picnic area, and a walking trail along the river. People stop there for lunch. Number 1. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia was a coal town of about 1,000 people. In May of 1962, the Borough Council decided to clean out the town landfill and hired 5 volunteer firefighters to burn the rubbish. The fire got into an exposed coal seam and went underground. It has been burning ever since. The town lit it itself. Efforts to dig it out failed. The seam ran too deep and branched too far. Carbon monoxide came up into basements. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy fell into a sinkhole that opened in his grandmother's backyard, 4 feet wide, and was pulled out by his cousin. A federal study priced the job of digging the fire out at somewhere above $600 million. Congress looked at that number and chose the cheaper option. In 1984, it appropriated $42 million to relocate the town instead. Most people took it. In 1992, the state condemned every remaining building under eminent domain. In 2002, the post office revoked the town's zip code. Here is the detail that should stop you. In 2013, the last handful of residents reached a settlement. They were allowed to stay in their homes for the rest of their lives. When the last of them dies, the properties go to the state. The fire is still going. Estimates give it another 250 years of coal. There are a few houses left, standing alone on streets with no neighbors, and smoke still comes up through cracks in the ground on cold mornings. It is worth being honest about what these 10 stories do and do not add up to. Most of them ended reasonably well for the people involved. They were paid, sometimes generously, and they moved somewhere safer. Love Canal produced a national law, but every buyout came after the damage, not before it. In almost every case, residents raised the alarm for years and were told there was nothing to worry about. The towns are gone. The reasons they had to go are mostly still there. The chat piles still stand over Kansas and Oklahoma. The fence is still up at Love Canal. The reservoir is still full. The farmhouses in the Minisink are still rotting in the woods, waiting for a lake that is never coming. And the fire is still burning under that hill in Pennsylvania, in the smoke and the cracked road and the empty streets. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want more of these. And if you lived in one of these towns, or your family did, tell me in the comments what it was actually like. Most of these places have nothing left standing to show anyone.